They were never meant to exist, and yet they did. Before the flood swallowed the earth, before the skies split open and the deep broke loose, there were beings who walked among men taller, stronger, and utterly unnatural. They were not simply powerful, they were something else, something forbidden. And when the waters came, when the world was wiped clean in a judgment so complete, it erased entire civilizations. History tells us they were destroyed. But what if they weren't? What if something survived? What if the flood did not end their story, but only buried it? Because long after Noah stepped onto dry ground, long after the ark came to rest and humanity began again, the giants returned, and the scriptures, quietly, almost reluctantly, admit it. In the earliest chapters of the ancient texts, before the flood, there is a passage so brief, yet so unsettling. It has echoed across centuries with unanswered questions. It speaks of a time when the boundaries between heaven and earth were broken, when the sons of God saw the daughters of men and took them, not married them, not loved them, took them, and from this union came something the world had never seen before, the Nephilim. Not merely large men, not just warriors or kings. They were described as mighty ones, men of renown, beings whose presence reshaped the world around them. Legends grew in their shadow. Fear followed in their wake. They were a corruption of creation itself, a distortion, something that should not have been allowed to live. And so the earth became filled with violence, not ordinary violence, something deeper, something primal, as if the very fabric of reality had begun to tear. And then the flood came, rain without end, waters rising from beneath the earth. Everything drowned, everything, or so we are told, because the story should end there. The corruption removed, the world cleansed, humanity given a second chance. But then, something strange happens. As the pages turn, as generations pass, as nations rise from the sons of Noah, the giants appear again, not once, not twice, but over and over, in scattered moments, hidden in plain sight. In the land of Canaan, they are there. In the territories explored by the spies of Israel, they are there. Men describe them not as myths, but as terrifying reality. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, they said, and so we were in theirs, grasshoppers against giants. These were not memories of the past, they were encounters, real, immediate, alive. And then there is Og, king of Bashan, a man whose bed alone was said to be over 13 feet long, not symbolic, not poetic, measured, recorded. A king who ruled not as legend, but as fact. How does something like this return, after a flood meant to erase it? How does a corruption of creation survive divine judgment? Unless it was never fully destroyed, or worse, unless it found another way back. Some have whispered that the same boundary that was crossed before the flood was crossed again after it, that the sons of God, whatever they truly were, did not cease, that their rebellion did not end, only paused. Others suggest something even more unsettling, that the bloodline itself somehow endured, carried through the flood, hidden, unnoticed, passed down quietly through generations until it surfaced again. A seed that could not be fully uprooted, a stain that remained, and when conditions were right, it grew again. But this raises a deeper question, one that lingers in silence between the lines of Scripture. Why were they so feared? Why does every mention of these beings carry not just size, but dread? Because the Nephilim were not just physically overwhelming, they represented something far more dangerous, a blending, a crossing of boundaries that were never meant to be crossed. They stood as living proof that creation itself could be altered, twisted, reshaped into something unrecognizable. And if that was possible then, what does that mean now? The ancient world did not treat these beings as myths. They built entire cultures around the fear of them. Stories of giants stretch across civilizations, different names, different lands, but always the same presence. Massive beings, inhuman strength, a connection to something beyond the natural world. It is as if humanity, across time and geography, remembered something it was never supposed to forget, a shadow that refused to disappear. And in the biblical narrative, these giants are not simply mentioned, they are hunted, driven out, destroyed with urgency, as if leaving even one alive was too great a risk, because perhaps it was never about their size, perhaps it was about what they carried, what they represented, a threat not just to human life, but to the order of creation itself. And so, wars were fought, entire nations wiped out. Commands were given that seem harsh, even brutal, until you begin to understand what was at stake. This was not ordinary conflict. This was containment, a final attempt to erase something that should not exist. But even then, the question remains, did it work, or did something slip through again? Because history has a way of repeating what it never fully resolves. And if the Nephilim were not just beings of the past, but the result of something deeper, then their story is not just ancient history. It is a warning, a reminder of what happens when boundaries are broken, when creation is tampered with, when the line between the natural and the unnatural is erased. But there is something else, something quieter, yet more unsettling. The scriptures do not dwell on the Nephilim. They mention them briefly, almost reluctantly, and then move on, as if the writers themselves knew that some truths are too heavy to explore in full, too dangerous, too unsettling, and so they leave. Fragments, clues, moments where the veil is lifted, just enough for us to see, but not enough to fully understand. And perhaps that is intentional, because what we don't fully understand, we cannot control. But what we do understand carries responsibility. So what do we do with this? What do we make of a world where giants once walked, where divine boundaries were broken, where something unnatural entered human history, and then, somehow, returned? Perhaps the answer is not in trying to uncover every hidden detail. Perhaps the answer lies in recognizing the pattern, the danger of corruption, the cost of crossing lines that were never meant to be crossed, the reality that not everything that exists should exist, and that some forces, once unleashed, are not easily contained. Because the story of the Nephilim is not just about giants. It is about rebellion, about power without restraint, about a world that lost its way and paid the price. And maybe, just maybe, it is also about us. Because even now, humanity stands at the edge of boundaries once thought untouchable. We explore, we experiment, we push limits. And in doing so, we ask the same question that echoes from the ancient past. How far is too far? The Nephilim were not just a mistake of history. They were a consequence, a result of something going terribly wrong. And the flood was not just a reset. It was a warning, a line drawn in the waters, a declaration that some things cannot be allowed to continue. But if they returned once, if they appeared again after everything was wiped clean, then perhaps the real mystery is not how they came back, but why the mound. Possibility was never completely removed, why the door was not sealed shut forever. Unless, it cannot be, unless the boundary itself is fragile. And if that is true, then the story is not over. It is only waiting, waiting for another moment, another crossing, another return. And the question is no longer about the past, it is about the future. Because if they never truly died, then what else is still out there, waiting to rise again? And when it does, will we recognize it? Or will we once again mistake it for something natural until it is too late?